The alien ship drifted silently through the cold emptiness of space. Its scanners pulsed steadily, washing the human warship in waves of investigative energy. The crew of the Verian scout vessel had been observing humans for many years, carefully watching their chaotic wars, their bold and careless expansion, and their strong refusal to accept the authority of the galactic order. They had seen the basic weapons humans once used: bullets, rough energy blasts, and nuclear missiles that barely made a dent compared to the advanced power of true galactic civilizations. The Verians had always thought of humanity as a wild species, too emotional, too reckless, and far too unpredictable to ever pose a serious threat. But now, as their scanners returned information about the human ship floating before them, a wave of fear swept through the Verian crew. "Hi, Captain," one of the bridge officers gasped, his spiny crest flattening in fear. "You need to see this." High Captain Zorth stepped forward, his sharp yellow eyes narrowing as he studied the incoming data. What he saw sent a cold shiver down his spine. The human ship, named Indomitable, was unlike anything they had ever seen. It wasn't just a spacecraft. It was a fortress, a fully weaponized beast that broke every known rule of warfare. Its hull wasn't made from ordinary metals, but from advanced materials specially designed to absorb and deflect energy attacks. Its armor was incredibly thick, far beyond what was reasonable, suggesting the humans had built it to survive a siege of unthinkable intensity. And the weapons. Zorth's throat tightened as he read the analysis. The Indomitable was loaded with terrifying weaponry: railguns that fired at near-light speed, plasma lances capable of slicing through even the strongest hulls in moments. And the missiles, there were thousands of them. Each carried warheads that didn't just explode, but bent space itself, tearing through shields and armor like they were nothing more than paper. But the most horrifying part wasn't the firepower. No, the real nightmare lay in the ship's secondary systems. The humans had designed weapons not only to destroy ships, but to hunt down the crews inside them. There were boarding drones equipped with blades sharp enough to cut at the molecular level and hacking programs designed to infect and override ship systems. There were nanite swarms built to eat through both metal and flesh without mercy. And worst of all, something they called the exotroopers, cybernetic soldiers unlike anything the galaxy had seen. These monstrosities were created from fallen human soldiers, warriors brought back with cybernetic upgrades, their bodies enhanced with enough firepower to destroy entire cities. One of the Verian officers turned pale with fear. This isn't a warship, High Captain," he whispered. "It's a nightmare made real." Zorth couldn't take his eyes off it. Humans had always fought like trapped animals, desperate, determined, and without hesitation. They didn't follow rules or show restraint. And now they had built a weapon that fully embodied that terrifying nature. A sickening truth settled in Zorth's chest. The Galactic Union had spent years debating whether to welcome humanity or eliminate them before they became too dangerous. Many had dismissed humans as insignificant, unworthy of concern. That had been a mistake. The humans had been preparing for war. And now they were ready. Zorth swallowed hard and gave a single order to his crew. "Shut down the scanners. Power down all weapons. Send a message to the homeworld." "What should we tell them?" an officer asked. Zorth exhaled slowly, his voice quiet but firm. "Tell them, we must never provoke the humans. Silence filled the bridge of the Verian scout ship. High Captain Zorth stared at the terrifying ship before them. The Indomitable floated in the void, completely still, as if it were waiting. Watching. The crew followed his orders immediately. They disabled their weapons, powered down the scanners. But it was already too late. The human warship had noticed them. A wave of energy shimmered across its hull. Before Zorth could react, a transmission cut through their comms. The voice that followed was cold and mechanical, yet clearly human. Unidentified vessel. You have been scanning a Terran warship. State your purpose immediately. Everyone on the bridge froze. Verian ships were equipped with powerful stealth fields, meant to hide them completely. No species had ever detected them before. But the humans had. And they were not pleased. Zortha's mind raced. One wrong word, one false move, and this ship, this monstrous machine, would destroy them instantly. He no longer had any doubt about that. He took a deep breath and forced his spines to stay flat. Zorth forced his spines to lie flat and motioned to his communications officer. Open a channel. Do not, under any circumstances, show any sign of aggression. A soft click echoed as the channel opened. Zorth spoke calmly. This is High Captain Zorth of the Royan Exploration Fleet. We mean no harm. We were simply observing. There was a long pause. Then the voice returned. Observing, huh? The tone had something strange in it, mockery. Let me guess. You thought we wouldn't notice. Thought your fancy cloaking tech made you invisible. Zorth felt a deep pit form in his stomach. The humans had seen straight through them. That was not our intention, he replied smoothly, lying without hesitation. We've been monitoring many civilizations across the sector. Yours is simply of particular interest to us. Another silence followed. Then their sensors showed a shift. The Indomitable was powering up. Its engines glowed with unnatural force, and its weapon systems began cycling through readiness modes. Targeting systems locked onto the Verian vessel. Not one, but dozens. The ship was suddenly trapped in overlapping targeting paths, each predicting every direction they could possibly flee. If the humans chose to attack, there would be no escape. Then the voice returned. I suggest you choose another civilization to spy on. It was a warning, but behind it, an unspoken threat echoed clearly. Zorth clenched his jaw. He had made a critical mistake. The entire Galactic Union had. These weren't just some young species trying to evolve. The humans were already at the top, and now they were letting him go. Understood, Zorth said carefully. We will leave immediately. Another long pause. Then the human's voice softened, just slightly. Good choice. Now run along, little scout. And next time, remember who owns this sector. The transmission cut. Zorth didn't hesitate. Get us out of here now. The Verian ship spun around, its jump drive activating with a hum. In seconds, they vanished into the vast darkness. As stars streaked past them in the jump tunnel, Zorth finally let out a long, shaky breath. Humanity wasn't just dangerous. They were something entirely different. And the galaxy would never be the same. The Verian scout ship emerged from the jump, light years away from the terrifying presence of the Indomitable. High Captain Zorth had expected to feel relief after their escape. But that feeling never came. Instead, a sickening, a heavy weight settled in Zorth's chest. His claws tapped anxiously on the armrest of his command chair as he turned to his communications officer. "Send an encrypted transmission to High Command. They must hear about this immediately." The officer hesitated. "Captain, what should we tell them?" Zorth let out a long breath. "The truth. The humans are not what we thought they were." The message was encoded and transmitted within moments. After that, there was nothing left to do but wait. The bridge crew stayed tense, eyes flicking toward the sensor readings every few minutes, half expecting the Indomitable to appear behind them at any moment. Zorth couldn't blame them. It was supposed to be a routine scouting mission. The Galactic Union had classified humanity as a lower-tier civilization, promising perhaps but still minor. Aggressive, certainly. Dangerous, maybe. But nothing the greater empires couldn't handle if necessary. They had been wrong. Terribly, dangerously wrong. Minutes turned into hours. At last, a reply arrived from High Command. And Zorth almost wished it hadn't. The message was brief and grim. "You are ordered to report to the War Council immediately. Cease all further missions. Humanity must be re-evaluated." Zorth felt the color drain from his face. The War Council only met for existential threats. The last time they had gathered in full force was during the rise of the UAR hive, a parasitic race that had consumed entire star systems before being annihilated. And now, humanity was being placed in the same category. Zorth turned to his crew. "Prepare for another jump. We're returning home at once." As the ship's engines came to life, he glanced one final time at the darkness beyond the viewport. For centuries, the Rothans had believed themselves to be the true masters of strategy, champions of war, unmatched in intelligence and tactical wisdom. But now, for the first time in his life, Zorth felt like prey. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that humanity had become the apex predator of the galaxy. The most terrifying part. They hadn't even begun to reveal their full power. The Verian capital world, Zal Torath, shimmered beneath its twin suns as High Captain Zorth's scout ship descended toward the military command complex. Towers of black obsidian and reinforced steel rose high above the landing bay, their surfaces decorated with the emblems of the War Council, a symbol of discipline, command, and supreme control. Ordinarily, an audience with the War Council would be reserved only for the highest-ranking warlords in the Royan Dominion. The fact that he, a simple scout commander, had been summoned to stand before them could mean only one thing: fear. The War Council was afraid. The War Council was afraid. Zorth stepped off his ship, his boots echoing sharply against the polished black onyx floor. He marched through the corridor, flanked by silent honor guards, until he reached the towering doors of the council chamber. As the massive doors swung open, he was met with the imposing sight of the 13 warlords who ruled the Royan Dominion. At the center of the chamber sat Grand Warlord Torval, his face hardened by centuries of brutal conflict, deep scars etched across his skin like battle medals. His piercing golden eyes locked onto Zorth, and the room fell completely silent. "You've seen something," Torval said, his voice a deep growl. "Something that has shaken even you." Zorth stepped forward, his claws clenched tightly behind his back to steady his nerves. I have, Grand Warlord. And I bring grave news. He activated a holographic projector. An image flickered to life in the center of the room, rotating scans of the Indomitable, the massive Terran warship that had changed everything. As the detailed data scrolled across the Council's view, weapon specs, energy readings, heat signatures, power cores, a ripple of unease spread silently through the chamber. A wave of tension rippled through the chamber. This is a human warship, Zorth said firmly. A single vessel. And yet, it possesses armor that absorbs energy attacks, kinetic weaponry capable of bypassing our standard shields, and boarding systems designed to eliminate enemy crews before their ships are even destroyed. A quiet murmur of disbelief passed through the gathered warlords. Grand Warlord Torval leaned forward, eyes narrowing. You're suggesting that a single human warship rivals one of our dreadnoughts? Zorth met his gaze without hesitation. No, Grand Warlord. I suggest that it surpasses them. The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, Warlord Vaer, infamous for his ruthless campaigns against weaker civilizations, scoffed. Absurd. Humanity is young. Their technology is crude. Even if they've advanced, they lack the tactical discipline to pose a real threat. Zorth turned his attention to him. Then tell me, Warlord, how did they detect us through our stealth fields? How did they lock weapons onto our ship before we even realized they were watching? Vaer faltered, his words caught in his throat. Zorth continued, voice calm but edged with certainty. They didn't fire on us. They allowed us to leave. And do you know what that tells me? Torval's expression darkened. That they are not merely violent savages. Zorth nodded. Exactly. The humans are not just powerful. They are confident. They knew they could destroy us, and they chose not to. That kind of restraint is what makes them truly terrifying. 'Cause it means they're waiting. Preparing for something. A long, heavy silence filled the room. And for the first time in Verian history, a war council session ended without a decision. There were no commands to ready fleets. No declarations of war. Because, for the first time ever, the Dominion had encountered an enemy it did not know how to defeat. And worse still, the humans already knew that. The council chamber emptied slowly, warlords departing in silence, but the unease lingered in the air, like the scent of blood after battle. High Captain Zorth remained behind, standing alone before the great war table. His claws rested lightly on its cold, smooth surface. Grand Warlord Torval had not moved or spoken since the others left. His golden eyes remained locked on the glowing hologram of the Indomitable, rotating silently in the darkened chamber. At last, he exhaled through flared nostrils. You believe they are preparing for war? Zorth straightened. I believe they're preparing for something far worse. Torval's gaze sharpened like a drawn blade. Explain. Zorth stepped forward, tapping a command into the projector. The display shifted, now showing a detailed view of the Indomitable's power core. Strange, fluctuating energy patterns pulsed within, unnatural and unfamiliar. This ship, Zorth said slowly, was not just built for war. It was built for survival. This design, Zorth continued, suggests they expect to face overwhelming firepower. He gestured toward the data streaming from the Indomitable systems, the redundant power cores, the excessive number of kinetic weapons. Every engineering decision points to one terrifying possibility. Torval's voice dropped to a quiet growl. They're preparing to fight an enemy greater than us. Zorth nodded slowly. Yes, and whatever that enemy is. The humans are building their ships to survive it. Torval said nothing. His expression was unreadable, stone cold and still. Then, after a long pause, he turned to the few warlords who still remained in the chamber. Begin deep intelligence sweeps across all human-controlled territories. I want every intercepted message, every military movement, and every supply route analyzed. Then he turned to Zorth, eyes sharp as blades. And you, I have a new assignment for you. Zorth's spines rose instinctively. Whatever is needed, Grand Warlord. Torval leaned in, voice barely more than a whisper. I need you to find out what they're afraid of. Far away, deep within human space, aboard the warship Indomitable, Captain Elias Grant stood in silence within the command chamber. He stared at the holographic display replaying sensor logs from their recent encounter with the Royan scout ship. His officers had questioned the decision to let the alien vessel go. They had been nervous, uncertain. But Grant knew exactly why they hadn't destroyed it. With arms crossed and a cold expression, he reviewed the final energy scan of the Royan ship just before its retreat. They're starting to ask questions, his first officer said quietly. Grant nodded once. Let them. The officer hesitated. Do you think they suspect? Grant released a slow, steady breath, his eyes drifting toward the classified reports locked on his private screen. Sealed documents containing data that not even his bridge crew had clearance to see. The reports detailed the real threat, the one hidden from the rest of the galaxy for centuries. Captain Elias Grant looked out through the viewport, into the endless black of space. They'll find out soon enough, he murmured. Elsewhere, aboard the Verian dreadnought Sovereign Wrath, Zorth sat alone in his private chamber, eyes locked on the encrypted data feeds streaming across his console. The War Council had granted him unrestricted access to all classified intelligence regarding humanity. And what he found disturbed him more than anything he had witnessed in his long military career. The humans were hiding something. Over the past 50 years, their technological development had accelerated at an unnatural rate. They had advanced from basic planetary defense systems to warships that could outperform the best ships in the Galactic Union. Their vessels were built for endurance. Their weapons, designed for lethal precision. But none of that was what unsettled him most. The true anomaly was what they weren't doing. Every spacefaring race followed the same basic path: expand territory, gather resources, and push outward again. It was the instinct of every species seeking dominance among the stars. But the humans, they weren't expanding. Their fleet numbers had grown at an alarming pace. They were constructing massive orbital defenses, reinforcing colonies, and building shipyards that produced warships faster than Verian logistics could explain. But they didn't invade. They didn't conquer. They didn't move. They were waiting. Zorth tapped his claws thoughtfully against the console. If the humans were preparing for war, logic suggested it should be aimed at the Verians, or at least another dominant galactic species. But they showed no signs of aggression. So, who were they preparing to fight? Just then his console chimed, an alert for a newly decrypted file from the Royan intelligence network. Zorth's brow furrowed as he opened the transmission. A moment later his blood turned cold. It was a deep space scan, taken far beyond the edges of human-controlled space. A sector long marked as uninhabited, forgotten. But it was no longer empty. The images displayed wreckage, enormous fragments of shattered starships. Not human, not Verian, not from any known species. These ships were massive, larger than anything ever recorded. Their design was alien, angular, twisted, built with bizarre architecture. And the way they had been destroyed was unlike anything Zorth had ever seen. They hadn't been destroyed by conventional weapons. Something had torn them apart. Something had ripped those ships apart. And that wasn't even the most disturbing part. Amid the wreckage, faint energy signatures still flickered, active signals. Weak but unmistakable. Whatever had destroyed those ships was still out there. And worst of all, the humans already knew. Zorth clenched his fists. The Indomitable hadn't been built to fight the Galactic Union. It had been built to fight them, the monsters from beyond the stars. And for the first time he understood why the humans had let him go. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't intimidation. It was a warning. The only question now was, had the warning come too late? Zorth's stomach tightened as he scrolled through the rest of the intelligence files, his claws tapping anxiously against the console. This wasn't just a battlefield. It was a graveyard. A war older than any recorded history had been fought out there, in deep, forgotten space. And something had survived. The humans knew. They had always known. Zorth exhaled slowly, struggling to suppress the primal fear rising in his chest. He needed answers. He needed proof. And that meant one thing. He had to speak to the humans. Deep inside human territory, aboard the warship Indomitable, Captain Elias Grant stood quietly in the dim glow of the bridge. Tactical displays pulsed before him. His officers worked with calm precision, monitoring systems, updating scans, maintaining readiness. But Grant's attention was locked on a single, unsettling anomaly. A lone Royan vessel had just crossed into human space. No escorts, no weapons online, no signs of aggression. "Brave," his first officer muttered, arms folded. Grant smirked slightly. "Or desperate." He leaned forward. "Open a channel." A moment later, the view screen flickered to life, revealing the sharp, scaled features of Zorth. His yellow eyes tense and focused. The hardened Verian commander was showing something rarely seen in his species. Uncertainty. "Captain Grant," Zorth began, his voice steady but serious. "We need to talk." Grant tilted his head slightly. "Do we?" Zorth didn't flinch. "I've seen the wreckage. I understand now what your ships were made for. I know there's something out there. And I know you've been keeping it hidden from the rest of the galaxy." He tapped his claws lightly against his console. "And I know you're preparing for it." The bridge went silent. Captain Grant released a slow breath, rubbing his jaw. Then he raised his hand and motioned to his officers. Mute outgoing audio. His first officer leaned closer, voice low. Well, there goes the secret, Grant muttered. He nodded slightly, eyes narrowing as he studied the viewscreen. The Rothans were intelligent. He had always known that, but he hadn't expected them to uncover the truth this quickly. And now, things were getting complicated. The truth was, humanity hadn't just found the wreckage. They had encountered what caused it. And they knew that sooner or later, the war that had destroyed those ancient vessels would come knocking at their door. That's why Earth had changed. Their rapid militarization. Their refusal to expand beyond their borders. The endless production of warships like the Indomitable. It had all been preparation. Humanity wasn't interested in galactic conquest. They weren't trying to dominate other species. They were trying to survive. Grant unmuted the channel and looked directly at Zorth. You want answers, he said. Fine. But once I tell you the truth, there's no going back. Zorth's expression didn't shift. I understand. Grant exhaled slowly. All right then, he said. Let me tell you about the things in the dark. Later, in the subdued lighting of the Indomitable's command chamber, Captain Grant sat across from Zorth. Between them, a terminal flickered with encrypted files, classified reports that no non-human had ever seen before. Till now. Zorth sat in silence, his reptilian features calm and unreadable. But Grant could see the tension in his posture. The Verian commander had spent his entire life believing his people were the apex predators of the galaxy. That illusion was about to be shattered. Grant leaned forward, fingers interlocked. We first picked up strange signals about 80 years ago, he began. They came from the edges of explored space. Static bursts, strange pulses, odd gravitational distortions. At first we thought it was nothing. Just background noise. Stellar interference. But then ships started disappearing. Zorth's eyes narrowed. Pirates. Grant shook his head. That's what we assumed until we found the wrecks. He tapped a command into the console, and the holoprojector lit up between them. Distorted images filled the space. Twisted metal, fractured hulls, enormous gashes carved into the remains of warships. Ships torn apart by forces no one could fully understand. Some of the damage resembled energy weapon impacts. But most of it didn't. Some ships had been peeled open like fruit. Others had been disassembled on a molecular level. Zorth's spines began to slowly rise. His version of a shudder. Zorth's spines flattened. This wasn't war, he whispered. This was extermination. Grant nodded grimly. We sent scout teams to investigate. The first few never came back. His expression darkened. The ones who did return weren't the same. The hologram shifted again. This time the footage was worse. Helmet camera recordings from the first exploration teams. The feeds were grainy, flickering, unstable. But the sounds were unmistakable. Gunfire, screams, panic. And then, just before the feed cut, an inhuman shriek echoed through the chamber, a sound that made ice crawl along Zorth's spine. What did you find?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Grant let out a slow breath. At first, we thought it was evidence of an ancient war. A civilization that wiped itself out long ago. Then he hesitated. But then they woke up. The projection shifted again. Now it showed distant footage, recorded by long-range human patrols, capturing movement inside the wreckage field. At first, it looked like just another massive derelict ship drifting in the void. Until it moved. Zortha's claws curled tightly as the image zoomed in. The structure was enormous, larger than any dreadnought he'd ever seen. Its surface was jagged, covered in shifting plates, a blend of organic matter and metal, pulsing faintly as if alive. As the human fleet approached, the structure began to unfold. Dozens of appendages extended from its frame. Some were bristling with weapons. Others ended in twisted, claw-like tools. The footage zoomed into a hull breach. And Zortha's eyes widened in horror. He saw them, figures tall and distorted. Elongated limbs, unnatural movements. Once they had been something else. Beings from other civilizations. Some still wore the tattered remains of alien armor. Others bore scraps of uniforms, trophies of species that had been taken. Then the attack began. The footage dissolved into chaos. Human ships opened fire, but the entity adapted. Energy beams bent away from its skin. Kinetic rounds dissolved before hitting. And when it struck back, it was like nothing Zorth had ever seen. The human vessels didn't just explode. They withered, their hulls corroding in seconds, the crews screaming as the very air inside their ships turned toxic, corrosive, alive. Then the feed cut. Silence filled the command chamber. Zortha's voice trembled when he finally spoke. "You survived." Grant leaned back, rubbing his temples. "Barely." He exhaled deeply. "That was our first encounter. We lost an entire fleet just trying to escape." He glanced at Zorth, his voice quieter now. "We call them the Erebus. We don't know if that's their real name. Hell, we don't even know if they have names at all." Zorth exhaled shakily. "And you've been fighting them ever since?" Grant nodded. "Not just fighting," he said quietly. "Preparing." His jaw tightened. "We don't know how many of them are out there. We don't know if they have a homeworld. Or if they just drift endlessly through space, devouring everything in their path." He paused, then locked eyes with Zorth. "But we do know one thing." Zortha's gaze didn't waver. "They're coming." Zorth sat in stunned silence. His mind reeled from the horrors he had just witnessed. Erebus, a name that meant nothing, yet felt ancient, heavy, unstoppable. He had spent his life believing the Royan Dominion stood at the top of galactic power, that they decided the fate of weaker species. But now he understood just how blind they had been, and how unprepared. The room remained eerily quiet, save for the soft hum of Indomitable systems. Captain Grant watched him closely, carefully gauging the alien commander's reaction. Finally, Zorth found his voice. "You should have told the Galactic Union," he said slowly. "They needed to know." Grant let out a short, bitter chuckle. "And what would they have done, Captain? Dismissed us. Called us paranoid. Accused us of spreading fear." He leaned forward, voice cold and calm. Or worse, they would have panicked. Zorth opened his mouth to argue but stopped. Grant was right. The Galactic Union was bloated and slow-moving. Every major decision took years, sometimes centuries, of endless debates and political games. If the humans had revealed the Erebus threat too soon, the Union would have either ignored the warning or sent fleets blindly into the unknown without understanding the enemy. Both paths would have ended in disaster. Zorth let out a sharp breath. So instead, you prepared in secret. Grant nodded. We stopped expanding. We started fortifying. Every colony became a fortress. Every outpost a line of defense. We built warships like the Indomitable, designed not to conquer but to endure. His expression turned grim. Because we don't know when the Erebus will arrive in full force. Only that they will. Zortha's claws curled against the table. The Rothans had always prided themselves on their military strength. But against this enemy, against a species that adapted instantly, one that absorbed biology and technology alike, they wouldn't last a month. None of them would. And then, a terrifying thought crossed his mind. Zortha's mind raced. He looked up and asked quietly, "Have the Erebus already reached your inner worlds?" Grant didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was enough. Zorth felt his blood run cold. "How long do you have?" Grant exhaled, rubbing his temples. "If our projections are right," he said softly, "maybe a decade, maybe less." Decade. 10 years before the skies burned. Zorth straightened, his mind already turning with urgency. If he returned to the Dominion with this knowledge, the War Council would listen. They had to. If they didn't, it would be their own extinction. But even that wouldn't be enough. The Dominion alone couldn't stop this. The entire Galactic Union had to be warned. Every species, every fleet, every soldier, they all needed to prepare. He met Grant's gaze. "You let me leave once before, Captain," Zorth said. "That was a warning. A demonstration of your strength." He took a deep breath. "Now I'm asking you to let me leave again, but this time to fight." Grant studied him for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "Then you'd better move fast, Captain," he said. "Because time is running out." As the Verian ship departed human space, Zorth sat silently in his command chair, staring into the endless void. He had come seeking intelligence. He had found a nightmare. And now, the greatest war in galactic history was about to begin. Not between empires, not between species, but between life and the thing that had come to erase it. Zortha's ship cut through the stars, heading straight for the heart of the Verian Dominion. There was no time to waste. Every second spent debating, every moment of hesitation, brought the Erebus one step closer to total destruction. He had to convince the War Council. He had to make them believe. But even as the stars streaked past his viewport, doubt gnawed at him. Would they listen? Would the Dominion, so proud, so sure of its place, accept that they were no longer the apex predators of the galaxy? Would they understand that the war they had spent centuries preparing for, the war against humanity, was meaningless now? Because this This was the real war. And if they refused to believe him, he'd make them believe. Because the alternative was unthinkable. 1 week later, Royan War Council chamber. Zorth stood tall before the 13 gathered warlords. His claws rested firmly on the cold metal war table. Tension hung thick in the chamber, like the air before a storm. The War Council room was filled with doubt, unease, skepticism. At the center sat Grand Warlord Tval, silent and imposing, his golden eyes scanning the intelligence files Zorth had just delivered. The other warlords whispered and muttered, disbelief spreading through the ranks like a contagion. The chamber buzzed with hushed voices. The warlords muttered among themselves, uneasy but still unconvinced. Finally, Warlord Vaer, known for his aggression and distrust, let out a snort. "This is madness," he growled. "You expect us to believe that the humans have been fighting a hidden war in the dark? That some unknown force waits beyond our borders, ready to devour the entire galaxy?" His spines rose sharply. "Humans lie, Zorth. They manipulate. This is a trick, a scare tactic meant to make us weak." Zorth's patience snapped. He slammed his clawed fist onto the war table, fangs bared. "You think I'm afraid of humans?" he snarled. "I saw what they saw. I heard the screams. I watched ships torn apart like leaves in a storm. I saw crews vanish, devoured by something we don't even understand." He pointed toward the holographic projection still glowing in the center of the room. "Look at it. Look at it. That is not human deception. That is death itself." The room went silent. Then Grand Warlord Torval leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "And you trust the humans?" Zorth hesitated. "I trust that they want to survive," he said firmly. "And right now, that's all that matters." Torval leaned back, arms folded, and nodded slowly. "You've given us much to consider, High Captain," he said. "The Council will deliberate." Zorth stepped forward, voice low but sharp. "There is no time for deliberation." Silence fell again. "This enemy doesn't negotiate," Zorth said. "It doesn't bargain. It doesn't care about politics or pride." He locked eyes with Torval. "It consumes. And once it arrives, there will be no second chances." Torval studied him for a long, tense moment. Then slowly he stood. "I will summon the full might of the Dominion," he declared, voice steady. His gaze swept across the chamber. "And then, we will bring this warning to the Galactic Union. If the humans speak the truth, then we all stand at the edge of extinction." His tone grew hard as steel. "And we will not go quietly into the void." Zorth finally exhaled. The tension in his chest loosened. It wasn't a victory, not yet. But it was a beginning. 5 years later, high orbit of Royan Prime. The combined armada of the Galactic Union floated in perfect formation above the Dominion homeworld. Thousands of ships from dozens of species, Verians, Rothans, Terrans, and more, lined the stars in a unified fleet of unprecedented power. Hillary. Each species had their rivalries. Each carried the weight of their own wars, their own long histories of conflict. But now, for the first time in galactic history, they stood united. At the heart of the massive fleet rested the Indomitable, once a symbol of mystery and fear. Now it was one of many. Humanity had shared their technology, their knowledge, and their warning. The Dominion had reshaped its military tactics. The Galactic Union had built defenses like the galaxy had never seen before. But would it be enough? On the bridge of his new flagship, Zorth stood beside Captain Elias Grant, both watching the endless dark stretch of space beyond the fleet. Grant's voice was calm, steady, but carried a sharp edge. "They're coming." Zorth gave a slow nod. "Then we'll meet them." A long silence followed. Then the stars shifted. A ripple, dark and unnatural, crawled across the void. And suddenly the shadows moved. They emerged from the darkness, ships or perhaps creatures. Their forms twisted and pulsing, a horrifying mix of organic flesh and warped machinery. Their hulls were decorated with the skeletal remains of civilizations long dead. The Erebus had arrived, and the war for the galaxy had begun.